My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 68 years old. And I just watched my daughter-in-law smirk as a lawyer read a will that cut me out of the $77 million inheritance my husband and I built together. Before I tell you how that same lawyer looked her dead in the eye and laughed out loud, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The air in the lawyer's office was thick and smelled of old leather and furniture polish. It was the kind of expensive silence that makes you feel poor just by breathing it. I sat on a stiff chair, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles were white. Across the polished mahogany table, my daughter-in-law, Olivia, sat like a queen on her throne. Her posture was perfect, her black dress was tailored, and a small tight smile played on her lips. She looked at me, not with pity, but with the cold, assessing gaze of a victor. Mr. Gable, Arthur's longtime lawyer, cleared his throat. He was a man who measured his words carefully, but today his face was an unreadable mask. He put on his reading glasses and picked up the thick sheaf of papers. "We are gathered today," he began in a monotone, "for the reading of the last will and testament of Arthur Vance." My heart hammered against my ribs. Arthur. My husband of 45 years. The man I had laughed with, cried with, and held as he took his last breath just 6 weeks ago. This was it. The final chapter. Mr. Gable's voice droned on, listing assets, stocks, properties in downtown Charleston. I barely heard him. My focus was on Olivia. She hadn't shed a single tear at the funeral, but now she dabbed at the corner of her eye with a pristine tissue. A performance for the associates in the room. Then came the words that stopped the world from turning. "And as such," Mr. Gable read, "the entirety of the estate, including all properties, holdings, and the controlling interest in the Vance Foundation, I leave to my devoted daughter-in-law, Olivia Vance." Silence. It was so absolute I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I looked at Olivia. Her smirk was back, wider this time. She met my gaze, a flicker of pure triumph in her eyes. It was a look that said, "I won. You are nothing." Mr. Gable slowly took off his glasses. He placed them deliberately on the table. He folded his hands. The room held its breath. Olivia was practically glowing with her victory. And then it happened. Mr. Gable looked straight at Olivia. His lips twitched. A low sound started in his chest. A rumble that grew into a full-blown laugh. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. He leaned back in his chair, laughing so hard his shoulders shook. The smirk on Olivia's face vanished, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief, which quickly morphed into rage. Her face turned a blotchy red. "What's so funny?" she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Mr. Gable wiped a tear from his eye, his laughter subsiding into a wide grin. He looked at her, then at me, and his smile softened for a second before he turned his gaze back to Olivia. "But to understand that beautiful, beautiful sound of justice, we have to go back. Back to the day of Arthur's funeral. The day my nightmare truly began. The funeral was perfect. Too perfect. Olivia had arranged everything. The lilies were magnificent, but they had no scent. The music was classical and elegant, but it had no soul. A slideshow of Arthur's life played on a loop, but it was filled with corporate events and posed family photos. None of the silly, candid shots I kept in albums at home. It was a funeral for a CEO, not for the man who used to sing off-key in the kitchen while making pancakes on Sunday mornings. After the last guest had left, their quiet condolences still hanging in the air, I stood alone in the entryway of the house Arthur and I had shared for 4 decades. Olivia strode in, all business, already stacking sympathy cards into neat piles. "I'll be handling the legal processing next week," she announced to the room at large. "I've already coordinated with the firm." Not once did she look at me. Not once did she ask how I was. It was as if I was a piece of furniture, a relic from a previous era she was preparing to put into storage. Later that evening, while I was numbly staring out the kitchen window, Olivia found me. She was helping clear some of Arthur's things from the study. I heard a crash. I rushed in to see the shattered remains of Arthur's prized ship in a bottle on the hardwood floor. It had taken him 6 months to build it, his steady hands painstakingly placing each tiny mast and rope. It was his masterpiece. Olivia stood over the wreckage, a broom in her hand. "Oh, what a shame," she said, her voice completely flat. "It just slipped." A cold dread washed over me. That was no accident. It was a message. She then held out a small cardboard box. Arthur wanted you to have this, she said, her voice laced with false sympathy. I took it, my hands trembling. Inside, nestled on a piece of tissue paper, were 3 of his old ballpoint pens. The kind he used to jot down grocery lists. That was it. 45 years of marriage, of love, of partnership reduced to a box of cheap, disposable pens. The insult was so profound, so deeply cruel, it stole the air from my lungs. That night, sitting in the cold, silent house, I understood. This wasn't about grief. This was a hostile takeover. I looked at the box of worthless pens, the final insult, and a cold resolve settled in my heart. But I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. Or that her next move would try to erase me completely. The next communication I received wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a text. It was an email, sent from Olivia's assistant, with a subject line that read, Estate Administration Meeting. It was as cold and impersonal as a dentist appointment reminder. The meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday at her firm's downtown office. No, hope you're doing okay, Eleanor. No. Let me know if this time works for you. Just a time and a place. A summons. For 2 days I debated not going. What was the point? To endure more of her staged sympathy and icy control? But a stubborn part of me, a part that sounded a lot like Arthur, said you have to face it. Elle, don't let her think she's scared you away. So I went. I arrived 5 minutes late, the Charleston traffic being a convenient excuse for my hesitation. The law office was on the top floor of a glass tower that scraped the sky. The reception area was sterile, all white marble and chrome, and it smelled faintly of eucalyptus and money. The young woman at the desk gave me a look that said I clearly didn't belong there, in my simple coat and sensible shoes. She led me to a conference room with a view that stretched all the way to the harbor. 7 people sat around a long dark table, all of them in dark suits, all of them looking serious and important. And at the head of the table, like a general commanding her army, sat Olivia. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her eyes were fixed on a stack of files in front of her. She didn't stand. She didn't say hello. She just gave a curt nod toward the only empty chair, at the far end of the table, as if I were a junior intern arriving late. I took the seat. No one offered me coffee. No one slid a folder across the table to me. I was an observer in a meeting about my own life. Olivia cleared her throat. As executor of the estate, she began, her voice crisp and professional, devoid of any emotion, I'll be walking us through the distribution of assets as laid out in the finalized will. She spoke like she was hosting a quarterly earnings call, not dismantling a family. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie. She went through the assets with chilling efficiency. Stocks, trust accounts, 2 commercial properties Arthur had bought as an investment, his partial ownership of a small winery in the countryside. My mind drifted. I remembered when we bought that winery stake. It was after a trip to Napa. Arthur had been so excited, talking about learning to make our own wine in retirement. A retirement we never got. Then Olivia dropped the first bombshell. As of 6 months prior to his passing, she said, not even looking up from her papers, Arthur transferred primary control of the family trust to me. I blinked. That was impossible. The trust was our safety net. I had been a co-trustee, an equal partner for 25 years. We had a rule. We discussed every major financial decision over dinner. Every single one. He would never ever make a change like that without telling me. It was unthinkable. Olivia continued, reading off allocations like a grocery list. A fund for our grandson's college education. A donation to the Historical Society. Her voice was a steady, relentless drone. And with every word, a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. My name hadn't been mentioned once. Finally, one of the junior lawyers at the end of the table, a young man who looked like he was barely out of school, shuffled his papers and asked, "And Mrs. Vance's share?" The room went quiet. All eyes turned to Olivia. She barely glanced up. She flipped a page in her folder, as if searching for a forgotten detail. "Ah, yes," she said, her voice dripping with finality. "There are no remaining distributions assigned to her under the current filing." Just like that. No explanation. No eye contact. She had just legally erased me. I wasn't his partner. I wasn't his widow. I was a loose end that had now been neatly tied up. A hot flush crawled up my neck, but I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there, my spine ramrod straight. The silence in the room was deafening. The lawyers stared down at their notepads. The young man who asked the question looked horrified. But no one challenged her. No one spoke up for me. When the meeting was over, I waited for everyone else to file out. Olivia packed her leather briefcase slowly, deliberately, almost as if she were daring me to say something to cause a scene. I think she wanted me to scream or cry. It would have proven her point that I was just an emotional old woman who couldn't handle things. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I stood up, adjusted the scarf around my neck, and walked out of that room without looking back. Down on the street, the cold November air hit my face like a slap. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad yet. Just hollow, as if I'd watched my own life get folded up, put in a manila folder, and filed away under someone else's name. Olivia hadn't just taken the money. She'd taken our history. She had rewritten the narrative, and my silence in that room had been her permission slip. I walked toward the parking garage, her words echoing in my head. No remaining distributions assigned to her. I wasn't a widow. I wasn't even a line item. I was nothing. Olivia thought she had one. But she forgot one thing about my husband. Arthur always left breadcrumbs. I drove home on autopilot. I don't remember the traffic or the turns I made. I just remember pulling into the garage of the home I no longer owned and sitting in the car with the engine off, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. The house felt different. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a museum of a life that was no longer mine. Arthur's favorite armchair was still in the living room. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand. But it felt like a stranger's house now, and I was a ghost haunting it. That afternoon I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark in his chair, until the sun went down and the room was filled with long, lonely shadows. I didn't want to answer the phone. I didn't want to eat. I just wanted to disappear. I felt a wave of despair so heavy it was a physical weight, pushing me down into the cushions. It would be so easy to just give up. To let her have it all. What was I, a 68-year-old widow, going to do against a barracuda like Olivia and her team of expensive lawyers? But then something inside me stirred. A flicker of defiance. It was Arthur's voice in my head, as clear as if he were standing next to me. Don't let her, Elle, don't you dare let her. I don't know what propelled me out of the chair. My body just moved. I walked into his study, a room I hadn't been able to bring myself to clean out yet. The air still smelled faintly of his aftershave and old books. My hand went to the bottom drawer of his big oak desk, the one that always squeaked. He was always meaning to oil it and I was always telling him not to. I liked the sound. It meant he was home. My fingers fumbled at the back of the drawer, behind a stack of old tax returns and bank statements. They brushed against something thin. A manila folder. It had no label. No date. My heart started to beat a little faster. With trembling hands I pulled it out. I opened it on his desk. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. The first was a handwritten note. It was Arthur's script, unmistakable, though a bit shaky, the way it had been near the end. It wasn't a letter. There was no "Dear Eleanor" or "Love Arthur." It was just a note to himself, a series of thoughts jotted down on a piece of legal paper. Olivia's pushing to update the will. Says it's just for clarity, to reflect current holdings. She's being too careful, too insistent. She started drawing up papers on my behalf. I haven't signed anything yet. Haven't told Eleanor. I know she'd ask the questions I'm too tired to face. I read it again. And again. The words blurred through my tears. He knew. He had suspected something. He had seen the ambition in her eyes, but he was sick, exhausted from the chemo, and he hadn't wanted to burden me. He was trying to protect me, and in doing so he had left me vulnerable. The second page was a photocopy of an older version of the will, and there it was in black and white. In the event of my passing, I leave my personal assets, including our home, shares and designated accounts, to my beloved wife, Eleanor Vance. The entire paragraph had a thick, angry red line drawn through it. In the margin, in what looked like Olivia's sharp, precise handwriting, were 2 words. Discuss with RVRV were the initials of her personal lawyer. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a discussion. This was an execution. The third page was a typed schedule of appointments. Legal consultations. The dates were from the last few months of Arthur's life, on days when he was home between treatments. I was with him almost every hour of those days. The only time he was ever alone was when Olivia would insist on coming over to give me a break. She wasn't giving me a break. She was isolating her target. The folder was thin, but it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. This was it. This was the proof. It wasn't just a mistake or an oversight. This was a deliberate, calculated campaign to write me out of my own life, orchestrated while my husband was dying. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in his study, the 3 pages laid out on the desk in front of me like sacred texts, and I waited for the sun to come up. By dawn, the grief that had paralyzed me had hardened into something else. Something cold and clear. Resolve. I knew exactly who I had to call. There was only one person Arthur trusted completely. A man who had been his friend and lawyer for 30 years before he retired. A man who had been the best man at our wedding. My hand was steady when I picked up the phone and dialed the number for David Chun. Holding those trembling papers, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a war. And what David told me next on the phone confirmed my worst fears. David picked up on the second ring. His voice was warm, the same calm, reassuring voice I'd known for over 40 years. "Eleanor? Is everything all right?" "David," I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. "I need to see you. It's about Arthur's will." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A knowing silence. "I was afraid I'd be getting this call," he said softly. "Where and when?" We met the next morning at a quiet corner cafe on Broad Street, the kind of old-fashioned place that still had checkered tablecloths and served coffee in thick ceramic mugs. The morning drizzle streaked the windows. David slid into the booth opposite me, his kind eyes full of concern. He didn't waste time with small talk. I didn't either. I opened the manila folder and pushed it across the table. He read in silence, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. He traced Arthur's shaky handwriting with his fingertip. When he got to the copy of the will with my name crossed out, a muscle in his jaw tightened. He put the papers down and looked at me, his expression grim. "It's worse than I thought," he said, his voice low. "I knew Olivia was ambitious, but this is predatory. What do we do, David?" I asked, feeling a sliver of hope for the first time in weeks. He pulled a small notepad and a pen from his coat pocket. "First we fight. Arthur would never have wanted this. This is a perversion of everything he stood for." He started jotting down notes. "These witness signatures on the new will. I don't recognize these names. Arthur always used people we knew, a neighbor, someone from the club. Using complete strangers is a massive red flag. It suggests they wanted people who wouldn't ask questions." He tapped his pen on the notepad. "I'm a retired corporate lawyer, Eleanor. This is dirty. This is probate litigation. We need someone who lives and breathes this kind of fight. We need a shark." "A shark? Her name is Sarah Jenkins," David said. "She's the best probate litigator in Charleston. She's tough, she's relentless, and she hates bullies. She'll take one look at this and smell blood in the water." He looked at me. "It will be expensive. It will be ugly. Olivia will fight back, and she will fight dirty." "I don't care," I said, and the strength in my voice surprised me. "This isn't about the money anymore. It's about his memory." David smiled, a real smile this time. "That's the Eleanor I know." He made the call right there at the table. While he was on the phone, I remembered something else. The name in Arthur's calendar. Halstead. I told David about it. "Mark Halstead," David said, nodding after he hung up. "A financial consultant. Very reputable. Good man. I'll reach out to him discreetly. If Arthur met with him, there will be notes." We met Sarah Jenkins 2 days later at her office. It was nothing like Olivia's firm. It was small, functional, and lined with shelves overflowing with law books. Sarah was in her 50s, with sharp eyes that didn't miss a thing and a handshake that could crush walnuts. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered strategy. She listened without interruption as David and I laid out the story, spreading the contents of the folder on her conference table. She asked sharp, pointed questions. Then David mentioned the witness names. Sarah leaned forward. a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Tell me those names again." David read them out. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Sarah's face. "Well, well," she said softly. "This just got a lot more interesting. I know those names. They came up in another case of mine last year. Unlicensed notaries. People who get paid cash to sign whatever is put in front of them. No questions asked." She looked at me. "This wasn't just Olivia being greedy, Mrs. Vance. This was a carefully constructed fraud. For the first time I felt like I could breathe. I had a team. I had a path forward." Later that day David called. He had spoken to Mark Halstead. The news made my stomach clench. Halstead confirmed that Arthur had come to see him, looking frail and exhausted. He had specifically asked about setting up ironclad protections for me, ensuring my financial security for the rest of my life. He was worried, but he kept saying Olivia was helping him organize things. Halstead had suggested a follow-up meeting to finalize the plan. A week later, Olivia herself called Halstead's office and canceled all future appointments. She said Arthur's needs had been taken care of. She hadn't just influenced him. She had actively blocked him from protecting me. As Sarah started laying out the plan, a formal motion to contest the will based on undue influence and potential fraud, I felt a real spark of hope for the first time. But just then Olivia launched another attack, one far more insidious than simply taking the money. The following Tuesday was my book club meeting. It was a small thing, but it was my thing. A group of 8 women I'd known for over 20 years. We'd seen each other through births, deaths, divorces, and everything in between. It was my safe space, my circle of support. After the nightmare of the past few weeks, I was looking forward to just being with my friends, to an hour or two of normalcy. I walked into Carol's house, the host that week, and the atmosphere felt off. The usual buzz of cheerful chatter was muted. A few women gave me quick, tight smiles and then immediately looked away. Marge, who always saved me a seat next to her on the sofa, was suddenly engrossed in a deep conversation on the other side of the room. It felt like walking into a room where everyone had just been talking about you. I sat down, a cold feeling creeping into my stomach. The book discussion was stilted and awkward. When I tried to offer a point, my comments were met with a brief, uncomfortable silence. It was clear I was being frozen out. After the meeting, as everyone was gathering their things, I cornered my closest friend in the group, Linda, in the kitchen. "Linda, what is going on?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Did I do something wrong?" Linda couldn't meet my eyes. She busied herself rinsing a coffee cup in the sink. "Of course not, Eleanor," she mumbled. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice sharper now. "I'm not an idiot. Something's happened." She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and guilt. She let out a heavy sigh. "It's Olivia," she said quietly. "She called a few of us last week. Separately." "Olivia? What did she say?" Linda wrung her hands. She said she was very worried about you. That you were understandably not yourself after Arthur's passing. She said you were having a hard time accepting the terms of the inheritance. That you'd become confused, paranoid even. I stared at her, my mouth agape. The audacity of it. The sheer venomous cruelty. "She told us you were making accusations," Linda continued, her voice dropping lower. "And that her lawyer advised that it was best for everyone to just give you some space while you worked through your grief. She made it sound like we'd be doing you a favor by keeping our distance." A punch to the gut. That's what it felt like. She wasn't just trying to steal my money and my home. She was trying to steal my credibility, my friendships, my sanity. She was painting me as a grieving, hysterical widow who couldn't be trusted. A classic ugly trope used to silence women for centuries. And it was working. My friends, the women I had trusted for decades, had believed her. They had chosen the word of a sophisticated, well-spoken barracuda over the woman they had known for half their lives. The humiliation was a physical burn. I felt my face flush, my hands start to shake. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell Linda everything, about the folder, the crossed-out will, the fake witnesses. But I couldn't. Sarah had been crystal clear. "We don't show our hand until we're ready to play it." Saying anything now would just make me sound exactly like the unhinged person Olivia was describing. I mumbled a thank you to Linda and walked out of that house, my head held high, but my heart shattered into a million pieces. The drive home was a blur of tears. This was a new level of evil. It was a calculated character assassination. She was trying to isolate me, to cut me off from my support system so that when I did fight back, no one would believe me. I would be all alone. I sat in my car in the driveway, the engine off, and for a moment I almost gave up. She was too smart, too ruthless. How could I possibly win against someone who would stoop so low? Maybe I should just walk away, leave with my dignity what little of it she'd left me. You can imagine it, can't you? Being told by your friends that you're crazy, that you're not to be trusted. It's one of the worst feelings in the world. I was so close to just letting her win. But if you think Olivia succeeded in shutting me up, stick around because this is the moment a 68-year-old woman learned how to fight back. I called David, my voice thick with tears, and told him what had happened. He was silent for a moment and then he said, "Good. Good." I choked out. "How is this possibly good?" "Because this isn't the action of a confident person, Eleanor," he said, his voice firm and steady. "This is the action of a cornered animal. She's scared. She knows her case is built on lies. So she's trying to discredit the only witness who can expose her. She's overplayed her hand." His words cut through my despair. He was right. This wasn't a sign of her strength. It was a sign of her weakness. Olivia wanted to paint me as a lonely, crazy old woman. She made a mistake. She didn't break me. She just gave me my greatest weapon. Having nothing left to lose, Sarah Jenkins moved with the speed and precision of a surgeon. The smear campaign at my book club was the last straw. "She's trying to poison the well," Sarah said during our next strategy call, her voice clipped and angry. "It's time we start drilling our own." Her first move was to file a motion to depose Olivia's legal assistant, a young woman named Megan Price. Her name had appeared as a notary on one of the disputed trust documents. It was a long shot. Usually, junior staff are fiercely loyal or too terrified to speak against their bosses. But Sarah had a hunch. "People like Olivia," she explained, "they get arrogant. They think the little people are invisible. Sometimes, the little people are the ones paying the most attention." A formal request for a deposition was sent. We expected Olivia's lawyers to fight it, to try and block it, claiming it was harassment. But to our surprise, they agreed immediately. It was another power play. They wanted to show they had nothing to hide. They were confident their story would hold up. The deposition was scheduled to take place at Sarah's office. I was there, sitting quietly in a corner with David as per our right. We were there not to intimidate, but to be a silent testament to the truth. Megan Price walked in exactly on time. She was in her late 20s, dressed in a simple gray suit, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked terrified. Her hands were trembling, and she wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. Olivia's lawyer, a slick man with a plastic smile, sat beside her, patting her arm reassuringly. He looked completely at ease. He thought this would be a formality. Sarah began gently, asking about Megan's duties at the firm, her responsibilities, establishing a baseline. Megan answered in a small, quiet voice. Then Sarah guided her to the document in question, the addendum to the trust, the one that gave Olivia full control. "Miss Price," Sarah said, her tone still mild, "this is your signature as the notary, correct?" "Yes," Megan whispered. "And do you recall the circumstances of this signing?" "The document is dated Sunday, October 12th. Megan hesitated. She glanced at Olivia's lawyer, who gave her a subtle nod. I sometimes come in on weekends to catch up on work." "I see," Sarah said. "And was Mr. Arthur Vance present when he signed this document in front of you?" This was the key question. A notary must physically witness the signature. Megan swallowed hard. Her eyes darted around the room, anywhere but at Sarah. The silence stretched. Olivia's lawyer leaned in. "Just answer the question, Megan. To the best of your recollection." His tone was smooth, but there was a hint of steel underneath. Megan took a deep breath. And then she did something none of us expected. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small leather-bound daily planner. She opened it and pushed it across the table towards Sarah. "I keep a work journal," she said, her voice suddenly stronger. "I note down anything unusual." Sarah picked up the planner. Olivia's lawyer half rose from his chair, his plastic smile gone. That's not admissible. It's her personal property and she has volunteered it. Sarah cut him off without looking at him. Her eyes were scanning the page. She stopped and a slow smile spread across her face. She turned the planner around for everyone to see. On the page for Sunday, October 12th, in neat, precise handwriting, was a short entry. It read, 7:43 p.m. Sunday witness sig for OV. No OV present. OV said he was in the car waiting. Felt wrong. The room was utterly silent. Olivia's lawyer looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Megan Price had just torpedoed their entire case. She had kept a receipt. But she wasn't done. There's something else, Megan said, looking directly at me for the first time. Her eyes were filled with apology. 2 days before Mr. Vance went into the hospital for the last time, I was at my desk. Ms. Vance was on a call in her office with the door open. She was speaking with a financial advisor. I heard her say it very clearly. Megan paused, taking another shaky breath. She said, "We need to expedite the silent liquidation of the smaller, less noticeable assets. The sooner the better, before things get complicated." A collective gasp went through our side of the table. Silent liquidation. It was the language of a thief, not a grieving family member. She wasn't preparing for his death. She was pillaging his estate while he was still alive. Olivia's lawyer slammed his briefcase shut. "This deposition is over," he snapped. "I believe you're right," Sarah said calmly, leaning back in her chair. "I think we have everything we need." As Megan left with a terrified but relieved look on her face, I knew the tide had turned. This was more than suspicion now. This was hard evidence. A first-hand witness. A written record. Proof of intent. Megan's testimony was the smoking gun. We had her. But Sarah had a bigger plan than just going to court. She wanted to let Olivia walk right into her own trap. And the stage was about to be set. A week after Megan's bombshell deposition, a thick cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. The embossed lettering on the back was from the Vance Foundation. My heart sank. I expected it to be a formal, threatening letter from Olivia's lawyers. But it wasn't. It was an invitation. Olivia was hosting a lavish charity event at the Charleston Country Club. It was billed as a tribute to the life and legacy of Arthur Vance. Cocktails. A silent auction. All proceeds going to the foundation. It was a brilliant, cynical move. She was using my husband's memory as a shield, positioning herself as the grieving philanthropic heir, carrying on his good work. She was trying to cement her new role in the eyes of Charleston society before the lawsuit could become public knowledge. My first instinct was to tear the invitation into 1,000 pieces. The hypocrisy was nauseating. I called Sarah, my voice shaking with rage. "You won't believe what she's done now." After I explained, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Sarah said, "You're going." "What?" "No, I can't be in the same room as that woman." "Yes, you can," Sarah said, her voice firm. "You're not going to cause a scene. You're not going to confront her. You are going to go as Arthur Vance's widow. You are going to hold your head high. You are going to be a quiet, dignified presence. Let people see you. Let them see you aren't the hysterical, grieving woman she's been painting you as. You're going to be a ghost at her feast, Eleanor. And you're going to listen." So I went. I chose a simple, elegant navy blue dress, one Arthur had always loved. I wore the pearl earrings he gave me for our 35th anniversary. I needed to feel like his wife, not her victim. The country club ballroom was glittering. A huge, smiling portrait of Arthur, a photo I hated, one where he looked tired and thin, was displayed near the entrance. Olivia was in her element, gliding through the crowd, accepting condolences with a perfectly practiced, somber expression. When she saw me, her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. A flicker of panic. Then she composed herself and approached me, her smile tight. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm so surprised you came. I was worried it might be too difficult for you." "It was my husband's legacy being honored," I said, my voice even and calm. "Where else would I be?" I saw a flash of anger in her eyes before she masked it. "Of course," she murmured, before being swept away by another guest. I spent the next hour doing exactly what Sarah told me to. I was a quiet, dignified presence. I spoke to old friends. I let them see I was composed, clear-headed, and very much sane. And I listened. I drifted over to the silent auction tables. My breath caught in my throat. There, among the donated spa packages and golf weekends, were several of Arthur's most personal possessions. His collection of antique fountain pens. A first edition of The Great Gatsby that I had found for him on our honeymoon. The label beside it simply read, "From the collection of Arthur Vance." My name, my part in that story had been completely erased. I felt a familiar hot rage bubble up, but I pushed it down. I turned away from the table and nearly bumped into George Peterson, one of Arthur's oldest business partners. "Eleanor, it's good to see you," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "A lovely tribute. Olivia is doing a wonderful job carrying the torch." I just nodded. "In fact," he continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "she's a real go-getter. She called me a few weeks before Arthur passed, you know. Wanted to discuss a strategic transition of his board responsibilities to ensure continuity. Very forward-thinking." I froze. There it was. More proof. He thought he was paying Olivia a compliment. He had no idea he had just handed me another nail for her coffin. She hadn't just influenced a dying man. She had been actively planning her takeover with his colleagues behind his back while he was still fighting for his life. I thanked George for his time, excused myself, and walked out onto the terrace, my heart pounding. Each piece of the puzzle was clicking into place. She hadn't just seized an opportunity after Arthur's death. She had been circling like a vulture for months. Leaving the party that night, I no longer felt grief, just ice-cold determination. Olivia had built her own stage. She just didn't know I was the one who was going to bring down the curtain. The charity event was the final piece of intelligence we needed. The next week, Sarah Jenkins informed Olivia's legal team that we would be moving forward with the lawsuit. They were cocky. They sent back a dismissive letter, calling our claims frivolous and baseless, the unfortunate product of a grieving mind. They didn't know about Megan Price. They didn't know about George Peterson. They thought they were in control. That was when Olivia made her final fatal mistake. She got arrogant. She decided to call a formal meeting of the Vance Foundation's board of directors. The agenda's primary item was to officially vote her in as the new permanent chairwoman. It was a power move, designed to solidify her position before our lawsuit could gain any traction. And in a move of ultimate, condescending cruelty, she had her assistant send me an invitation. "You are cordially invited to attend." She wanted me there to witness her coronation. She wanted to rub my face in her victory. "This is it," Sarah said on the phone. "This is our moment. She's gathered all of our targets in one room for us." I walked into that boardroom on a Thursday afternoon. It was the same room where she had erased me weeks before. The same long polished table. The same serious faces. Olivia sat at the head of the table, looking regal and composed in a dark blue power suit. When she saw me, she gave me a small, pitying smile. It was the smile of a cat who has the canary cornered. I didn't return it. I walked to the same empty chair at the far end of the table and sat down, my back straight, a simple leather portfolio in my lap. The meeting began. They went through minutes, financial reports. I remained silent. Then they reached the main event. Item 4. Transition of executive oversight. One of the board members, a man named Henderson who had known Arthur for years, began. "We are all here to formalize the transition and express our gratitude to Olivia for stepping in during such a difficult time." Olivia took over. She gave a flawless, well-rehearsed speech about her deep respect for Arthur, her commitment to his vision, the weight of the responsibility she was about to undertake. It was a masterful performance. Then she looked directly at me. "And I especially want to thank Eleanor," she said, her voice thick with false humility, "for her support during Arthur's early years, and for her grace in stepping aside to allow for this smooth transition. We all appreciate you." Her grace in stepping aside. The room was looking at me, expecting me to nod, to smile, to play the part of the gracious, doddering old widow. This was my cue. I didn't say a word. I didn't stand up. I simply opened the leather portfolio in my lap. Inside was a single, neatly prepared document. I took it out and passed it to the board member sitting next to me. "Could you please pass this down to Mr. Henderson?" I asked, my voice quiet but clear. A ripple of confusion went through the room. The man took the folder and passed it along. As it made its way down the long table, a silence fell. Olivia's smile tightened. She had no idea what was in it. Mr. Henderson, the chairman, took the folder. He opened it. His eyes scanned the first page. I knew what he was seeing. A cover letter from Sarah Jenkins, outlining our formal motion to contest the will on grounds of fraud and undue influence. He flipped the page. He was now looking at a notarized, signed copy of Megan Price's full deposition, including the part about the fake signature and the silent liquidation. He flipped again. A sworn affidavit from George Peterson about Olivia's call to him before Arthur's death. And again, a forensic analysis highlighting the inconsistencies in the will's formatting. I watched his face. I saw his expression shift from mild curiosity to confusion, then to shock and finally to a deep simmering anger. He looked up from the papers, not at me but at Olivia. It was a look of utter contempt. He closed the folder with a soft, final thud that echoed in the silent room. He didn't need to say a word. Everyone saw it on his face. Olivia's composure finally cracked. Her face went white. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" I stood up, my legs steady. I looked down the length of the table at the woman who had tried to destroy me. I looked her directly in the eye. "My lawyers will be in touch," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as ice. Then I turned and walked out of the room. The frantic whispering and the sound of Mr. Henderson's voice, now sharp and commanding, erupting behind me was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The boardroom counterattack was a detonator. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Henderson, the board chairman, suspended the vote and launched an emergency internal investigation that very afternoon. Olivia's lawyers sent a furious, threatening letter to Sarah, full of bluster about slander and malicious interference. Sarah's response was simple. A single comprehensive package containing every piece of evidence we had, delivered by courier to every single board member's home address. Checkmate. Faced with an airtight lawsuit, a mutinous board, and the complete destruction of her public reputation, Olivia folded. Took less than a week. Her lawyers contacted Sarah with a settlement offer. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a complete and total surrender. Olivia would withdraw her fraudulent will. She would relinquish any and all claims to the estate and the foundation. She would sign a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive she couldn't even mention Arthur's name in public again. In return, I would agree not to press criminal charges for fraud and forgery. I sat in Sarah's office as she laid out the terms. "It's your call, Eleanor," she said. "We can take her to court. We can ruin her. There's a real possibility of jail time." I thought about it for a long moment. I pictured Olivia in a courtroom, humiliated, broken, and I felt nothing. My fight hadn't been about revenge. It had been about truth. It had been about reclaiming my life and honoring my husband's memory. Dragging Olivia through a criminal trial wouldn't serve that purpose. It would only create more headlines, more ugliness. "No," I said finally. "Let her disappear. That's all I want. I want her gone." And so it was done. Papers were signed. The nightmare was over. A few days later, after the dust had settled, I was going through some of Arthur's old financial paperwork, preparing to finally have a clear picture of our assets. I came across a key to a safe deposit box at a small independent bank across town. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't our usual bank. Curious, I went that afternoon. The bank manager, a kind older gentleman, led me to a small private viewing room. He placed the long metal box on the table and left me alone. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside there wasn't much. A few stock certificates. The deed to a small cabin in the mountains we'd bought decades ago. And on top of it all, a thick sealed envelope with my name on it, in Arthur's familiar strong handwriting. And beside it, a single black USB flash drive. I tore open the envelope. It was a letter dated just 3 weeks before he passed away. "My dearest Eleanor," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means that Olivia has done what I feared she would. I am so sorry, my love. I am sorry for not being strong enough to stop her myself, and for not telling you sooner. I saw the change in her, the greed that started to flicker in her eyes. I saw how she began to manage my affairs, to isolate me, all under the guise of helping. I was so tired, Elle. The treatment was taking everything out of me. I knew if I told you, you would jump into the fight, and I couldn't bear the thought of putting that stress on you while you were already taking care of me. I tried to push back, but she was relentless. So I did the only thing I could think of to protect you without starting a war in our final days together. I made a new friend. His name is Mr. Gable. He's not with my usual firm. He's an old-school lawyer, a man of integrity. I met with him secretly. He helped me prepare one last thing. A final will that no one can forge, no one can manipulate, no one can argue with. It's my true and final testament. The contents are on the flash drive. Give it to Mr. Gable. He knows what to do. He will make sure the truth is heard. Forgive me for my silence. It was born of love. Everything I ever did was for you. Always. Yours forever, Arthur. Tears streamed down my face, soaking the pages of the letter. He hadn't been weak. He hadn't been fooled. He had been playing a different game entirely. He was protecting me even from beyond the grave. He had known, and he had laid the perfect final trap for Olivia. A trap she had no idea was even there. Holding that USB drive, it all clicked into place. The first will reading, the one I wasn't invited to, wasn't the real one. Mr. Gable hadn't been Olivia's lawyer. He had been my husband's secret weapon. Arthur had never abandoned me. He had orchestrated this final act from beyond the grave. And I knew exactly when that final curtain would rise. The final official reading of the will was, in a legal sense, a formality. Olivia had already signed away her claims. This was just the court-mandated procedure to close the estate. But for me it was everything. It was the public vindication. It was the final chapter Arthur had written for us. We were back in the same boardroom. Me, David, and Sarah on one side. Olivia and her shell-shocked lawyer on the other. And at the head of the table, Mr. Gable. This time, when I met his eyes, there was a warm conspiratorial twinkle. At Sarah's strategic insistence, the proceedings began in a bizarre way. Mr. Gable was to first read aloud the fraudulent will, the one Olivia had created. It was part of the legal record of the contestation. He had to acknowledge it before he could nullify it. So for 5 excruciating minutes, we all sat there as he read the lies. He read the words that gave everything to Olivia. I glanced at her. A flicker of her old arrogance had returned. Even though she had lost, she was being forced to listen to a version of reality where she had won. And a small smug smile touched her lips. She was savoring this tiny pathetic victory. Mr. Gable finished reading. He put the papers down. And that, he said, his voice neutral, is the document filed by Ms. Olivia Vance. He looked directly at her. He let the silence hang in the air. Olivia's smile widened, a final act of defiance. And that's when he laughed. It was the same booming, incredulous laugh from my memory, the laugh that had started this whole journey. It filled the silent room. Olivia's face went from smug to confused to furious in a matter of seconds. Is something funny, Mr. Gable? Her lawyer asked stiffly. Funny? Oh yes, Mr. Gable said, wiping his eye. It's hilarious. It's a wonderfully creative piece of fiction. Commend you. However, his voice suddenly became sharp, authoritative. It is not the truth. And it is not the last will and testament of Arthur Vance. He turned to his briefcase. My client, Mr. Vance, was aware of potential, let's call them discrepancies, that might arise after his passing. So he took an unconventional step to ensure his final wishes were understood with perfect clarity. He pulled out the small black USB drive. He made a recording, Mr. Gable announced to the stunned room. He plugged the drive into a laptop connected to a large monitor on the wall. A moment later, Arthur's face filled the screen. He was in his favorite armchair in the study. He looked thin and his voice was weak, but his eyes were as clear and sharp as ever. They burned with a fierce intelligence. He looked directly into the camera, as if he were looking right at me. Hello everyone, he began. If you are watching this, it means I'm gone. It also means my daughter-in-law, Olivia, has likely presented you with a document that does not reflect my wishes. Olivia made a small strangled sound. Arthur continued, his voice calm and steady, as he laid out the entire story. He spoke of Olivia's increasing pressure, her isolation tactics, Her attempts to get him to sign documents when he was exhausted and medicated. He spoke of her greed. It was a systematic, devastating takedown, delivered with the quiet authority that only the truth possesses. Then his expression softened. He looked into the camera, and I knew he was speaking directly to me. "And to my Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My partner, my love, my everything. Forgive me for not fighting this battle with you by my side. I wanted your last memories of me to be of peace, not of war. Everything I have, everything we built, is and always was for you." He turned his gaze back to the wider audience. "Therefore, I hereby state for the record that any and all previous wills or testaments are null and void. My true and final wish is this." He paused, taking a breath. "To my daughter-in-law, Olivia Vance," he said, his voice now cold as steel. "For her tireless efforts in managing my affairs, I leave the sum of $1. A collective gasp went through the room. "The remainder of my estate," Arthur declared, his voice ringing with finality. "In its entirety, the houses, the investments, the accounts, and the full and unconditional control of the Vance Foundation, I leave to my beloved wife, Eleanor Vance. It is hers, as it always has been." The video ended. The screen went black. No one spoke. Olivia was ashen, a statue carved from salt. Her lawyer was staring blankly at the dark screen. Mr. Gable broke the silence. He picked up a $1 bill from his desk, walked over to Olivia, and placed it gently on the polished table in front of her. "Your inheritance," he said. In the weeks that followed, the silence that fell over my life was different. The heavy, oppressive silence of grief and betrayal was gone. It was replaced by a new kind of quiet. The quiet of peace. The quiet of a world set right. Olivia vanished. She moved out of state, a ghost in the society she had tried so desperately to conquer. The legal documents were finalized, the accounts transferred. The house, my home, was mine again. But it wasn't the material things that mattered. It was the feeling of walking through the rooms and knowing I belonged there. The oppressive weight was lifted. I could breathe again. I didn't step into the role of chairwoman of the Vance Foundation. That wasn't me. That was Olivia's ambition, not mine. Instead, with the board's blessing, I took on a new role, Founder's Legacy Advisor. My job wasn't to run meetings or fundraise. It was to be the keeper of the flame, to ensure that the projects we funded and the work we did stayed true to Arthur's original vision. A vision of quiet charity, of helping people without fanfare. I spent my days in the Foundation's archives, reading through Arthur's old notes, rediscovering the passion that had started it all. It was healing. It was like having a conversation with him, page by page. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the Foundation, forwarded to me. It was from a young woman in a city I'd never been to. She was a recent college graduate, the first in her family. She wrote to say that a small scholarship from the Vance Foundation 10 years ago had changed the entire trajectory of her life. It wasn't just the money, she wrote, but the fact that someone out there believed in her. She was now a teacher, helping kids from neighborhoods just like the one she grew up in. I held her letter, the paper worn soft from being folded and unfolded, and I cried. Not tears of sadness, but tears of profound gratitude. This was the real inheritance. This was the legacy. Not the millions in the bank, but the ripples of good that spread out into the world, touching lives we would never know. It was what Olivia, with all her ambition, could never have understood. That evening I sat in the garden behind our house, a place where Arthur and I had spent so many happy hours. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was cool and clean. I thought about the long dark road I had traveled. The shock, the betrayal, the fight. I had been tested and I had been pushed to the very edge of my breaking point. But I hadn't broken. I had to fight to reclaim my name, my story, my life. And what I learned is that strength isn't always about being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it's the quiet, stubborn refusal to be silenced. It's the resolve to speak your truth, even when your voice is shaking. Thank you for walking this journey with me today. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand up and fight for your place in your own family or your own life, I want you to share your story in the comments below. You are not alone, and your strength can be a beacon for someone else going through their own storm. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world.